Hello, today we're going to talk about Anchor 7 evolution. When we think about evolution, what is your definition of evolution? Evolution refers to an orderly sequence of changes over a long period of time. When we think of evolution, a lot of us look at and think of the picture that is here to our right, that we over time changed into the man that we are today. How does evolution happen? In a population, organisms can be different genetically. They have different traits or phenotypes. All of a population's genes are called the gene pool. So how can we change our gene pool? How can we change the phenotypes? One is with mutations. A mutation is a change in the DNA sequences. And another way that we can change the gene pool of a population is by gene shuffling. And if you can think of why do you shuffle a deck? It's so that you mix up the cards. When you think of gene shuffling, it's the shuffling of our genes caused by sexual reproduction. When we sexually reproduce, we shuffle the genes and we get different variations of people. Evolution also depends on the environment. These traits can be good or bad. The driving force of evolution is based on natural selection. And if we look at this word, natural selection is organisms with favorable traits will survive and reproduce, passing on their good traits. So in other words, nature will select those with good traits so that they will survive and be able to reproduce. Because it's not enough just to survive, but you have to be able to reproduce to pass on the traits. And we call this survival of the fittest. Those with the good traits, by a process of natural selection, have survived and they have the best fit traits. So the better the fitness that you have, the better the chance of surviving. Evolution, over time, the population's gene pool changes, and we see this word adaptation or adapt. Now that doesn't mean that if we were underwater, we would adapt and grow gills. A lot of people get this term adaptation confused. Basically, when we talk about adaptation, it means that you are born with a lucky gene that makes you well suited to your environment. If you were born with this lucky gene, like a long neck for a giraffe, you will survive and you will be able to reproduce, and over time you will see that the long-necked giraffes have been adapted to their environment. So it wasn't that all of a sudden there was all these giraffes grew long necks, or if the world were flooded, that we would all grow and develop gills so that we could survive in water. It just doesn't happen that way. If you're born with a lucky trait that allows you to survive in the environment, over time you have adapted to that environment and you are successful. If we look at this picture here, we can see that they have adapted, they have good traits for their environment. The flower mantid in Malaysia is right here, and you can see the stick mantid in Africa is below it. The next slide. Natural selection is a main way that a gene pool can be altered. Genetic drift can also play a role in altering the gene pools. Genetic drift is the unpredictable change in the alleles. So when we talk about genetic drift, we cannot predict it. at all. An example of genetic drift is founder effect. If we look at the picture here for founder effect, it's kind of like you think of Christopher Columbus and the Pilgrims founded America. Here is Europe, or here are all the ladybugs, and you can see that they are yellow and red, and a select few of them are on this island, and that becomes the population. So founder effect is a few individuals become isolated. So on this island, these red ones have become isolated from the population over here. As a result, this is all they have to reproduce with, so the island will not be as genetically diverse as where they came from because they're all going to be red instead of red versus yellow. So genetic drift, there is less variety. Who discovered the theory of evolution? Charles Darwin. And his observations are that all species come from or resemble fossils of extinct species. Species living in close geographic areas resemble each other. We resemble people in North America. The Asia people resemble Asian people. The African American people represent the African American. And where you are geographically is who you resemble. Now, with air travel, we have mixings, and we don't really have a lot of close geographic areas. You can move to many different places. Species seem well suited to their environment and lifestyles. You are the way you are because you're successful in that environment. If you can think to the bird beak lab that we did with the chopsticks and the tweezers and the spoons, those with the good beaks were able to get the food, were able to survive. Those with not good traits, they were being not able to get their food and they would die out. If we look at this, descent with modification, we can see that it's almost a phylogenic tree where all species come from a common ancestor and they branch off. And where you have the branching, you have differences that emerge from them. So these two on this branch are related genetically. They have a closer relationship than this one over here and the armadillo over here. They are further apart, therefore they have less genetic in common. Here is a phylogenic tree again. As you go up, there are differences that occur. Where there's a branching, they are more closely related. Evidence for evolution include homologous structures. Here you see the word homo. Homo means same or similar. The structure is similar, but here's the difference. The function can be totally different. What do I mean? The four limbs of vertebrates. If you see over here, there is the bones, the humerus, the radius, the ulna, the carpals, the metacarpals, and the phalanges. The penguin, the bat, the alligator, and the human all have these bones. So they have a basic similar structure, but the function of the forearm of the penguin is much different than the bat. The bat flies, the penguin uses it to swim. The alligator uses its forelimb to crawl. And humans have a variety of tasks. Obviously, we can't fly like the bat. We could crawl or we could swim. If we look at the next slide, vestigial structures. Vestigial structures have no apparent function in modern descendants, like us. Example would be the human tailbone and the appendix. They don't really have a function that we know of. At one time, they may have. And that's just showing the appendix. And finally, embryology is the study of the embryology development. And we look a lot similar to other animals. And as we develop our differences. Similarities in organic macromolecules reflect ancestry. How do new species form? Speciation is the process of making a new species. One way of making a new species is when you have reproductive isolation. This occurs when members of two populations cannot interbreed, meaning that they have different times that they breed, or they have, like in these particular example, you have two species have different shells, the spirals in different directions. As the spirals are in different directions, their genital openings don't match up, therefore they can't mate. There's a reproductive isolation. Even though they both are snails, they have differences, they can't reproduce. Or these skunks mate at different times of the year. One mates in late winter and one mates in late summer, so therefore there's a reproductive isolation. You could also have a geographic isolation. Here the geography, where you have the Grand Canyon, where squirrel A can't get over to squirrel B. There is this barrier here. Therefore, over time, they develop into different populations, different species. And this concludes a very short version of evolution.